Thank you very much for talking to me. Taking your time to...
Well, maybe after I talk to you, say, oh, you got all the Doupe drove nuts with his comments.
That's what I say.
Think so.
Aaron, are you a University of Binghamton?
No, we've had...
Jack, J-A-C-K, Gilroy, G-I-L-R-O-Y.
Okay, and your title?
I'm president of the Boone County Veterans for Peace.
King of the United States.
Pardon?
King of the United States.
It's always a wise guy.
Talk to me about what's going on today.
Well, today is, in our opinion, should be not Veterans Day, but Armistice Day. We believe that Veterans Day has become a time in which to praise war and the warriors. But Armistice Day was the original November 11th event. It was a celebration of the end of armaments, the end of war. It was a time of peace, to celebrate not fighting and killing, but rather to say, it's over with, let's make sure it stays that way. That was starting, back after the Great War, World War I. However, what it has morphed into is what is known as Veterans Day, starting in 1954. And it seems like over the years, it's been a great economic boom for all these restaurants and various parades that go on to praise the warrior. And again, so we're trying to revamp and restart the idea of what the original intent for celebration of peace is.
When you said it is now, in a sense, idolizing something that it's not supposed to be, not originally intended. Can you go in a little bit further in depth about how you said, restaurants are starting to embark and prosper off of this day? Really kind of go a little bit more in detail about what really frustrates you the most.
Sure, it has become almost a holiday hype, just as Halloween and Christmas, whatever you can do to get the customer in the door. So all these generous people trying to give gifts or give coffee and donuts to, and well beyond that as well, to veterans. Of course, this is good PR for them because the veterans and American militarism is the sacred cow of American culture. Militarism is what fuels this country. We spend over 50% of our income, tax income, on armaments, on weapons of destruction. In fact, the United States leads the world in the export of weapons. I mean, that doesn't seem like what we want to be.
And talk to me about this parade here today, please.
Right.
Now, I know that there was some problems going back and forth about you guys unable to march in this parade. Can you please talk to me about that?
Sure. We've been told by a parade committee, we're not even sure how many are on the committee, that now have control of who they want to be in the parade in the city of Binghamton. And we have been, we don't say march, we've been walking, we don't march anymore, we don't follow orders. We have been walking since 2003, and no problem until this past Memorial Day when we were told that we could not because we were a political group. We had signs and we had a message, as if they didn't have a message. Guys carrying guns, the Marine Corps League, and all the rest. That's all about politics. This is what it's about. So if we do have a sign, such as the one that you see behind me here, saying health care and education, not militarization. Is that political? It sure is. It's also cultural. It's also compassionate. And we also think that it could be a generous move for the United States to put aside militarism and begin to concentrate on what is really needed, health care for everyone, and education, K through 16, right? Not just K through 12. So that's what we're about here today.
And despite the fact that you also have a bunch of veterans that will be walking today as well, correct?
Oh, sure. We have veterans, some of them wounded in Vietnam, individuals who have been into Iraq. We have people who are just in the military. Most people in the military don't go into combat. They're with anything from the 3rd Battalion Shoe Repair Group, to individuals who are cooks and drivers and all the rest. But nevertheless, these people, the group who unite us, said that we are not a true veterans organization. Well, I have to kind of disagree with them on that because we have thousands of people in the United States, and now we have individuals around the world. Now we have been able to entice Australians and Brits, Irish, Koreans, Japanese, Okinawa people into Veterans for Peace. So we think it's not just an organization, it's a really growing and booming organization, because war is not the answer.
And what necessarily is it going to stop you from walking in this parade today?
No, we'll walk. We will respectfully watch the people with the guns and the various other political messages that they have, and we'll just step right in and walk behind it.
Talk to me about why walking today is so important, sending your message alongside everyone else that's going to be walking down today. Talk to me about why that is so important.
Well, it's important because we're not part of the militarization program. What we're part of is saying it's time to create greater dialogue. It's a time when we are very close to the worst situation in a nuclear confrontation since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have some individuals who are leaders of the government. We have individuals who are leaders of this United States government that some psychiatrists say that they are certified insane. They have serious mental problems. And so I don't think people realize how dangerous it is. Every time when the President of the United States walks around, he has a guy walking behind him with a black box, which is the nuclear box. And this is just absolutely insane that we have an individual who's unstable, who could at almost any time cause the death of millions of people.
And talk to me about you told me about the message that you want to give out. You told me about what you really represent. But coming back to the day, Veterans Day, you told me what today really is all about. Why is it important to acknowledge these veterans that have put their lives on the line in the past? Can you talk to me about that?
Sure. We're trying to impress individuals younger than the veterans. We're trying to impress individuals who may have the unfortunate idea that they're going to learn discipline or be able to get a good career out of going into the military. When you go into the military, your prime objective is to learn how to kill. There's no two questions about it. You know, they can say we're going to make you a good cook or a good engineer, but what you are trained to do is kill. So we're saying let's change from that militarization to a new kind of ROTC, a new kind of basic training, which is immediate response to dangerous situations, not just in Louisiana or Puerto Rico, but around the world, that have a contingency force that's ready to go and help people, which would really show what we're about, and that is compassion and generosity.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add that I might have forgotten about?
No, we just want to thank very much the people who have prevented us supposedly from fighting, because they have given us an opportunity to tell more about what we really believe. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you.
I think we probably should gather together, folks. Maybe if the folks on the east side could move over here toward the west.
I'm actually a southerner.
That's right, we're from Southern
So
Pennsylvania.
join me in the middle.
Well, you're on the south side.
Look here. She's giving out money.
First of all, I think it's worth noting, why we are here this particular day. Before I introduce Art Suggs, the reporter from Fox News just asked that same question. And what we're here for is because we're trying to reclaim Armistice Day. Armistice Day was started after World War I. And the idea was on the 11th day of the 11th month, the 11th hour of the day, that churches around the United States would ring their bells, not in celebration of war or warriors, but in celebration of the end of hostilities and the hopeful beginning of peace. We know that didn't develop. We've been at war almost all of these years since. But we feel that in 1954, when it was morphed, Armistice Day, into Veterans Day, an awful lot was lost. What was lost was that the soldier became the sacred cow in American life, the warrior in the war. And it's pretty well seen if you travel around and see all the freebies that go out to veterans, right? It's a great economic way to increase your sales, because after all, everybody loves the veterans, right? And they love what they have done, and therefore we'll give them free coffee and donuts and even have free shows, theatrical events, some hotels free for the night. It's great PR with little thought about the fact that you are just priming the pump and maybe pumping the pump for more activities. Instead of diplomacy, it's diplomacy out of the barrel of a gun. So Armistice Day is something that we think has to be resurrected. And Veterans for Peace, next year, November of 2018, will be meeting at the United Nations for the first time. And at the United Nations, for the first time, will come together people from around the world who are now organizing Veterans for Peace. Some of them have already been around. This past summer in Chicago, I went to the conference, the Veterans for Peace conference, and there were people there from Okinawa, Japan, Korea, Ireland, England. Next year, they're going to be from more countries as well in November at the United Nations. So think about that. It would be a great time to go down and to get involved at the UN. But in order to have our group here, we wrote to Reverend Art Suggs and asked him if he would consider allowing us to put a cemetery on the front lawn, on the Main Street lawn. And he said, we'll get back to you. And within a period of a few days, he wrote back and said, I've talked to the congregation about it, and we think that, yes, it's a good way to get people to think about the importance of lives other than Americans. So what you see here, this is based on various estimates of the number of Iraqis that were killed from the time that we invaded in March of 2003. United States government figures are as low as about 200,000. But there are statistics that indicate it's over 1 million, 1.12 million. We took from Huffington Post and a couple of other stats around 500,000 people, because there should be a question mark, I guess, here, a sign somewhere, because we don't know what beyond 500,000 is the true figure. But we do know that here's the number right here, 4,520 poor young Americans, male, female, mostly male, who died. And as former CIA analyst Ray McGovern has stated, they died in vain. And some people say that's pretty crude to say that. No, Ray said no, because it's true. We had no right to go into Iraq. We had no right to attack those people. No Iraqis were attacking us. But, so it was a hard sell, I'm sure, for some people to think that we would be here today at the First Congregationalist Church. But Art Suggs is a different kind of individual, a Midwesterner, a guy with degrees in physics, fellow who taught physics, went to Purdue and then on to a theological school at Princeton, has his doctorate of divinity, a very well read and individual who can really appreciate what we are doing here today. And we appreciate so much that Art has given us this opportunity. So Art, please do say a few words.
Jack, that was very kind. Thank you. And thank you for pointing out there's very little I can say about the one versus all of these. In a sense, it's inexpressible. But I do want to say that we are glad that you are here on behalf of the congregation that meets behind me. We're very glad that you're here. I was eavesdropping on Jack while he was being interviewed, and the portion of the interview that I heard was that he was talking about the way in which setting this up is a political statement. The notion of healthcare and education rather than militarization is a political statement, but it's also a sociological one. It's also a cultural one. And then what I would like to add is that it's also theological. The way I expressed it to the church was in the form of a thought experiment. Does God love one of these Iraqi souls as much as he loves an American soul? And the answer, of course, is yes. How about a Vietnam soul, or a Russian soul, or a German soul? And it's just, it's a simple question. Of course God loves everyone equally. And I was raised, as Jack mentioned, I was raised in the Midwest. I was born in 55, which meant that in 73 was when I turned 18. And there was de-escalation in Vietnam at that time. I wasn't going to go to Vietnam, but instead I worked at a cemetery, and I buried a Vietnam soldier, pretty much one per day, at a very large cemetery in downtown Indianapolis. One a day, every day, day after day after day. And it's heartbreaking. But it enforced in me this notion that I should be hating the Vietnamese, until I got better at my theology and realized that no, God loves us, and if there is a difference in my love for one versus another, all that does is point out the difference between Art's thinking and God's thinking. And what I need to do is align myself more with what I know to be true from the divine. And so this is a learning experiment. This is something that's sort of in our face. It is so lopsided. And this is just Iraq. The same thing can be said for Vietnam. The same thing can be said for Korea. On and on and on. And so, look at it, let it sink in, and let us adjust our behavior as a nation. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
But if you do know him, you know that Gary, not only a retired United Methodist minister, but a United Methodist minister that has stayed on the job for peace and justice, leading a group in commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Gandhi. Next year is going to be 2 years from now, 1919, right, Gary? It's going to be the big year. But the last couple of years, Gary has organized an excellent activity here in town. But Gary has he has an attitude of a very international attitude and understanding. Gary has, the first time I met Gary, in fact, was in Mexico, not in Binghamton. I didn't know him. In 1995, my wife, Helena, and myself went to Mexico, to Cuernavaca, and took a course from Catholic nuns in liberation theology. And yes, it was pretty amazing. And we were in this, surrounded by this Catholic convent where I think, 12 or 13 Methodists, and we were 7 Catholics, I think. The Methodists outnumbered us. And it was just a great ecumenical setting. And after that, I've watched Gary go on to Chiapas, Mexico, to deal with the indigenous people put down by the Mexican government, to Palestine, to stand in alliance with the people of Palestine. with the apartheid kind of policy. Speaking of apartheid, he's been in South Africa and in Zimbabwe, where is it, in Mozambique? Zambia. He's been all over the world pretty much to try to find out what it is about the common people of the world that we have in common, that Art was just mentioning, the fact that if we can only get to understand other people. So please give a little hand to Gary here as he has a word or two, please.
Greetings, everyone. Basically, what Jack conveyed to you is that I've dabbled a lot, so it's good that we have a base of us here, who people who care about one another, and in this community are people who know a lot more than I do, and who have worked a lot harder than I have to bring about peace. This is my synopsis of what it is we're about. That the goal of our common life is peace, right and just relations among all people, respect for our mother, the earth, thanksgiving for all we have to share and for the ability to use our mental, moral, emotional, spiritual capacities for the common good. In my experience of meeting people in many parts of the world, people of many religions and philosophies, I think most people would subscribe to the goal I've just expressed: a common life of peaceable, joyful, just relations. President and former General Dwight Eisenhower said that the peoples of the world yearn for peace, and pretty soon their leaders ought to get out of the way so they can have it. This chapter of Veterans for Peace reinforces that sentiment, saying peace must be not only our goal, but our lifetime commitment to the generosity of spirit from which peace emerges, day after day after day. If you will, share with me in a prayer for peace, whose 20th century English author is unknown to me. But after each of the petitions, if you wouldn't mind, join in the words, "Deliver us." Remember, God of peace, the peoples of the world divided into many nations and tongues. Deliver us from every evil that obstructs your saving purpose, and fulfill your promises of old to establish a kingdom of peace, or a kingdom of peace. From the curse of war and all that creates it, deliver us.
Deliver us.
From believing and speaking lies against other nations, deliver us. From narrow loyalties and selfish isolation, deliver us. From fear and distrust of other nations, from all false pride, vainglory, and self-conceit, deliver us. From the lust of the mighty for riches that drives peaceful people to slaughter, deliver us. From putting our trust in the weapons of war, and from want of faith in the power of justice and goodwill, deliver us. From every thought, word, and deed that divides the human family and separates us from the perfect realization of love, deliver us. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
This morning when we rang the bell on the other side here, the Front Street side, there were some people who came from several towns. One family from Calicoon It happens to be that I know Chuck. I met Chuck Hang some probably 7 or 8 years ago when Stu Naismith was the president of, remember Stu? Stu Naismith was the president of the group. He drove all the way over, he and his wife from Calicoon. But later I also met Chuck because Chuck was involved in an action at Hancock Drone Base, and we drove back and forth to court on a couple of occasions. He had his motorcycle, left it over at a restaurant on 81, and I would drive him up to Syracuse and back, and then he would take off through the wilds at nighttime, the back roads to Calicoon. Chuck went to Vietnam as I believe he was drafted, he can tell you better than I, but he became a combat medic and was in some very difficult situations. So much so that he told me when he came back home, he couldn't go home. Came to California, got his discharge, got himself a backpack, and he hiked for 6 months in the Sierra Nevada. I think it probably did a world of good for him because Chuck is just such an interesting guy, a professional carpenter who I hear is just a master carpenter. But thanks, Chuck, for coming today, and if you can say a few words for us, that would be very nice. Here's Chuck back here. I'll hold your flag. Okay, your wife will.
Good afternoon. Y'all look so great out there. Well, I guess you heard the beginnings.
Put the mic up.
You sort of heard the beginnings of my journey. I was drafted, spent 15 months in Vietnam as a combat medic. Witnessed a lot of the effects that war has on a population of people that I knew nothing about. And I can only say that I returned from that experience with my humanity still in place. I did not look at the Vietnamese people in the way that we were led to look at them through my military training before going. I just couldn't think of them as someone that was beneath myself and deserving to be killed and mutilated and their land destroyed in the name of, well, what I was taught was our freedom here in this country. It began to not make sense to me while I was there, and once returning back home, I felt like I did not belong. I couldn't any longer have the same sense of what direction I was going in. Before going, I graduated college and got a great job and was drafted 2 weeks later, and didn't really experience what I thought was going to be the rest of my life. So it took a while to readjust, and as Jack said, I ended up going to the wild and just trying to figure that out. I hiked the entire coastline of Northern California to Oregon, and over the course of weeks spent every night on the bluffs looking out over the Pacific Ocean, knowing what was going on still to my guys in Vietnam. It wasn't, it didn't come to me. I didn't have any answers. I didn't find those answers. And through a kind of a failed attempt at suicide, I came out of that with I don't know quite why it happened, but I was in a place where I was listening to the speech that Dr. Martin Luther King gave in April of 1967 in New York. And that speech just resonated with me. It was the first time that I heard someone speak about what I had witnessed in a way that made sense. It gave me something to build on and continue my life. And I thank him and will thank him for the rest of my life for that. And so that began my thinking in a different way, that what I had grown up to understand maybe wasn't quite what it was really. But I did learn that going to war is a decision that's made for reasons that are camouflaged in the glorification of war. And as Jack alluded to, we veterans have become part of that instrument. And it's a fine line for us veterans to come to realize that the loss of our guys was perhaps solely in vain. And to expect a veteran to flip somehow and think otherwise, or to think that that's the case, that's a lot to ask. It's not easy. It takes years, did for me anyway, to realize that. And it's still an issue with me about thinking that veterans should speak up and come forward more than they do. I decided that that's what I should do, and that's why I'm here, and I'm glad to be here. My family has been my safety net, and along with other veterans that I've joined forces with and guys that I've looked up after Vietnam, and it's something that's carried me forth. And the major point that I would like to stress is that these decisions about war are made, and they're made incrementally, and before you know it, you're in it. And somehow we have to figure this out so that we can preempt those things that create the situation in which we feel that we need to go to war. And everything that Veterans for Peace does related to the economics of war, the environmental damage, the injustice, all of the various things that happen within this country and the street life, all add to why it's easy for us to decide to go to war. And I would like to make it just the reverse. I would like to make it easier to think about other methods, diplomacy, and the fact that war has not gotten us anything except those who have been in the midst of it have suffered, and their families as well. And so I would like to just leave you with the fact that it's decisions that we have to make, and I think we can do it. I've come to realize that, I don't know when it was along the way of working with Veterans for Peace, that I finally decided that it was really possible to do away with the need for war. Now, we obviously still have to have armies or police forces, that sort of thing, and I don't have any problem with that. But the decision about war is one that should not be made so easily. And let's work towards making that a little more difficult. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chuck. Jim Trainer is a Massachusetts guy who relocated to Endicott some few years back. And Jim was a combat engineer and went in the military on 2 occasions. Jim, in fact, was with us when we jumped in on the last parade, Memorial Day parade. And he was threatened by some of those thugs that just went by on their motorcycle down at the courthouse. So all I can say to you, if you do go down there with this, just stay away from some of those characters. You have a right to be here as much as they do. But Jim, would you please say a few words for us?
Nice crowd we got. You guys hear me okay? Okay.
Step right up to the microphone and speak right.
All right. Yeah. So, yeah, it's probably saying, I'm not a combat veteran. I was fortunate enough never to have to experience that. And what I can say is, from my experience, one thing that stands out, people were talking about kind of how militarization affects our view of the world. I had the opportunity to spend a lot of my time in the military in South Korea, and was fortunate enough to be in a position where I got to spend a lot of time with the Korean people, worked a lot directly with the Korean military, and got to know them. And I also got the chance to see, as a young soldier, an attitude that was present throughout, which was basically, okay, this is your country, but it's our world. That I think speaks to a lot of the attitude of this country when, we look at the rest of the world. I think when we think about the situation in Korea today, that the person who's currently occupying the White House, I'm not going to call him president, he and those around him toss around words that have consequences and forget that at the very beginning of a conflict there will be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths in one of the most populous areas in the world. And their lives don't even factor into the equation. I think here, I happen to be a social worker in this community. And I see the effects of poverty, I see the effects of mental illness, of addiction, every single day I'm at work. And I know when we talk about healthcare and education, the crisis that this country is facing today in mental health issues, mental illness, addiction, education, poverty. If we took the military budget and said, actually, what is it, even, at most moderate point of view, and said, let's cut back what we don't need. Let's cut back what the people in the military are saying we don't need. And took that money and put it into fully funding mental health services and addiction services in communities like Binghamton. If we put that money into providing an opportunity for everybody in this country, to have an education, the rate of poverty in this country would fall. We know from the experience of the single most powerful anti-poverty program in this country's history, even though it may not have been intended to that, the GI Bill after World War II, lifted more people out of poverty than any program in the United States in the history of this country. Providing an opportunity for everybody in this country, regardless of income, regardless of whether or not you're a veteran, to have a college education will lift people out of poverty. Providing the opportunity, taking that money that's wasted on programs that the Pentagon does not want and putting that into providing health care for every single person in this country will lift people out of poverty. We know that. And, to see, everything being wrapped up in words about how, freedom and liberty without stopping and thinking about what those words mean, is insane. People talk about rallying around the flag. Every single person here who wore the uniform took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I believe in that oath. But nowhere in that does it say the flag. Nowhere in that does it say the Pledge of Allegiance. What it talks about is a set of ideas about what it means to be a democracy. And part of the value of what we're doing today is that we are telling people, no, this is what matters. Our ability to stand out here and say, this is what we believe, regardless of what some of those people that are going to be coming down that street may say. Perhaps not most of them. Perhaps only a few, but probably some of the louder ones. That our ability to speak truth to power is what it's fundamentally all about. And so I just want to thank all of you for coming out here today and for giving me the chance to say what I had to say. Thank you.
I notice over to the left a fellow who has been vigilant in letting people know in the Syracuse area, and probably everybody in the country should know that he lives very close to a war zone, or is in a war zone, and that is the 174th Attack Squadron of the Hancock New York State National Guard. It pulls the trigger on drones over a number of countries, but we know Afghanistan for sure. Ed Kinane is the fellow who began organizing actions at Hancock, actions that are very creative, and has been arrested any number of times. I think it's something you really should know, even if you know a little bit about what's going on up there. Ed is the guy that we will get the straight story from. So Ed, would you kind of brief us on that, if you will, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Jack, for this opportunity. It's very good to be here. I came down with several other folks from Syracuse who are also active with the campaign to expose what's going on at Hancock Air Base. Hancock is the hub, the home of 174th Attack Wing of the New York National Guard. And what the Attack Wing does is it pilots drones, Reaper drones, MQ-9 Reaper drones. They admit to doing it over Afghanistan, but I'm sure they do it over the other countries where the MQ-9 Reaper drone operates as well. That drone is a robot that's guided by signals from Hancock Air Base that eventually get to a satellite, and then from the satellite it goes down to the aircraft itself, which then preys on a large region of the Middle East and Western Asia and parts of Africa. My own background is I spent about 5 months in Iraq in 2003. I was there before and during shock and awe. So as a witness to the vast destruction that happened to a city, which of course is where civilians are concentrated, the city of Baghdad, and people across the street from us were killed, and then spent some time afterward during the occupation. So that's where I come in terms of my own personal experience from the experience of war. I'm not a military veteran, although I've been in some war zones, but I am an associate member of Chapter 51 of Veterans for Peace up in Syracuse. And we have been, some of us, well actually the first demonstration against Hancock Air Base drones took place in 2009. We had a Thanksgiving fast, and it was myself and several other Veterans for Peace. And since then we've had, I would say, hundreds of demonstrations against Hancock Air Base, trying to expose what's going on there, primarily to try to reach the personnel on that base so that they could grasp the death machine that they're a part of. But also, we're right across the street from the base, on a busy street at rush hour, and we're also trying to reach the public that drives along that street. And of course, it's the public who pay taxes, our federal taxes. So much of our federal taxes go to the military machine. A large share of them do. And we, those who pay taxes, and I haven't paid federal taxes since 1987, but in paying taxes, we're complicit, because we're financing what's going on in these other countries. And what's going on are wars against the people of those countries that haven't been declared by our Congress, so they are illegal. Now, apart from that kind of technicality, they're illegal because they violate international law. They violate even our own U.S. Constitution, which says that the treaties we make with other countries are the highest law of the land. And our treaties, which includes the UN, prologue to the UN, say that aggression is illegal. Military aggression is illegal. So at a number of levels, international, the UN, national, Hancock and its sister bases around the country and around the world are engaged in illegality, which not only has dire consequences for those people that are attacked, but also for us, because it undermines law. It leads to chaos, even within ourselves, which is very destructive when you can't trust law. When I was in Baghdad in 2003, in March, I was in a little hotel with a group called Voices in the Wilderness. There were maybe about 30 of us that had decided to stick it out for shock and awe, which was terrorism. I mean, it's the essence of terrorism, what was happening there. It was a project of the Pentagon to terrorize the people so they might rise up against Saddam Hussein, who had been a U.S. ally and friend of the U.S. power structure. We use this word terrorism so readily. I mean, we each probably hear it several times a day in one context or another. And what terrorism is, and it's very seldom defined, terrorism is violence directed towards civilians for political or economic purposes. And that defines so much of U.S. foreign policy. And I lived under that, and my colleagues in Voices in the Wilderness also. Fortunately, we all survived. I don't know if it was because the military knew that we were collected in a particular hotel, but that didn't stop the Marines who came into Baghdad from shelling the hotel right across the street, the Palestine Hotel, that housed the International Press Corps. The message there clearly was that press, media, get out of here. We don't want you here witnessing our invasion. I'd like to talk more about the drone issue. It's complex. It's got a lot of ramifications. It affects us all. Let me just close with saying that we'd very much welcome folks from Binghamton, and we have folks in Binghamton. Jack has been in prison a couple of times, or a couple of months, 3 months, I think it was, up in Jamesville Prison for his resistance to the drone. Jim Clune is here from Binghamton. He's been a resistor from the get-go. Ron Van Nostrand, our pro bono attorney for some of our cases. There's probably others in the crowd too. But anyway, we would welcome any of you. Veterans for Peace chapter would be great to come up, form an affinity group, and join us in one of our resistance actions. Let me go with that. I don't like to be long-winded, although I already have been. Sorry.
I hope that Ed goes down to the United Nations next year when we gather down there. He would be just a great representative to let people around the world know something about drones. Is Dave Cashmere here? Dave is not here. Dave said he was going to come down to say something because he is on the pathway of the new drone testing area. Isn't that true, Ed? And Dave was going to tell folks something about that. But Jim, maybe you could speak to an issue. Jim Traynor was talking about the economic aspect. But as we wait for the parade to organize and come down, what is it, about 2 o'clock now? They should be coming down another 5 or 10 minutes. Jim, could you give us a bit of information here about what your economic concepts are? Jim, as you know, is past president, been many times president of Peace Action, and a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War.
I'm an associate member of the Veterans for Peace here. Since I was a conscientious objector, I was never had the uniform on. But I think that when we talk about our participation in war, I think we are all veterans, and we are all affected by what happens, what our brothers and sisters and sons and daughters do when they go into a war zone. We all are a bit affected by post-traumatic stress syndrome to a small extent, some much larger. It's inconceivable to me how bad PTSD can be to some people. And moral damage. We all suffer from that moral damage. I want to give one example of the kind of moral damage that happens. Ed mentioned the Voices in the Wilderness delegations that went to Iraq during the sanctions period. I was on one of them in April of '99, which is about the same time that we started the vigil here in the front of the Federal Building, which we still do every week. We went to a neighborhood in Baghdad that had been bombed during the original Gulf War. The Amariah shelter. Amariah is the name of a neighborhood. The shelter was built under contract from the Saddam Hussein government from a company in Sweden. It housed 500 people, all civilians, during a bombing raid of Baghdad. It was bombed during Operation Desert Watch. And I don't know whether Desert Watch or Desert Storm. It was, I'm not sure which part of it was, but it was during that period when the U.S. and its allies were bombing. This shelter, which held exclusively neighborhood men, women, and children, were in this shelter, and it was bombed through the chimney by one of our, I think it was an F-15 that went through. That shut the blast doors. 17 people survived. Inside there are people who might have survived, except that 20 minutes later, after the doors had been shut and people were trapped and starting to die from fire, and those who had already died from the first blast, another U.S. plane in what is called double tap came by and threw an incendiary down through that same chimney. And the rest of them who were there were incinerated. Those who were in the cellar where the water tanks were, the water tanks burst, and they all died by being boiled to death. We visited that shelter, and we read off all the names of those that they could. I would say that there's some moral damage involved here, both for the people who threw those bombs down, pressed the button, for all those in the chain of command all the way up to George H.W. Bush at the time, and also to us. I think we have to recognize that we all suffer from not just PTSD, but moral damage. My father and mother fought during World War II. They believed in what they were doing. The general who led them was Dwight Eisenhower. He was no pacifist, but he had a far better sense of the limits of military power and military pressure within Washington than the people around down there now understand. At the beginning of his presidency, he spoke to the American Association of Newspaper Editors, and in a highly quotable speech talked about, this was just after Stalin had died. I just learned this the other day when I was looking up this quote. When Stalin had died, Eisenhower wanted to tell the world what we had to offer. But he had to also recognize where we were. And what he said towards the end of that speech was incredibly prescient, incredibly relevant to today. This is President Eisenhower. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, for those who are cold and not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
Thanks, Jim. The parade, I think, is just about ready to start down there. I see some movement. Bill Piccone was a Army veteran and is an Army veteran and spent some time in Korea. I met Bill because he was an excellent teacher at Maine Inwell High School for many years. Bill, can you say a few words, please? And then Dick Keough, if you don't mind, from Syracuse, and Rick Sprout from Binghamton. You all indicated you'd be interested in saying something.
You've heard very, very moving comments. I'm not prepared. I wasn't expecting this, but yes, I growing up in New York City. I had two uncles who were in the Second World War. One didn't make it coming out. And I had grown up with the movies, the propaganda, the John Wayne movies, and I thought that would be very heroic. And I was drafted. When I got into college, I was just 17, so I hadn't been able to sign up yet or anything, but I knew I was drafted. After college, I had asked to have my draft moved up, so it was 3 days after I graduated that I was in the Army, and then I wound up in Korea. And that was after the war. That was 56, 57, 58 that I lived there, and working in a classified message center. But seeing the devastation around, I had just seen one person who had been shot by a North Korean, But I didn't see the massacres, but I saw the results of the devastation over there. And what moved me tremendously was looking at the faces of women, elderly women, and everything was askew, but a loveliness there. And I realized how much they had suffered, and I realized how much they had gone through. And so I was asked to teach professional men and women who wanted to come to the United States. And I thought this would be good so that they could see what we have here and perhaps let us know about the horrors that we had perpetrated over there. And then when General MacArthur wanted to invade China, I was horrified with that. And that was prior to my being in Korea. But I was very, very happy with President Truman, other than other things which had disturbed me very much. But I'm very happy to see him relieve MacArthur of that command. And all I wanted to say is, I then traveled the world, and wherever I went, I was telling people about the horrors that I had seen, and they were letting me know how much they sympathize with those. And so you people, you're the backbone of this country. You may not know it, you may not realize it, you may not be aware of it, but that's what you are, and I congratulate all of you. Thank you.
Dick Keough from Syracuse is an Army veteran, guy who came out of the Army and decided that he was going to have a career as a Catholic priest, but fell in love with a lovely lady, and that ended that situation. Father of 2 grown daughters, and so good to see you again, Richard. Take care.
As I was standing here and thinking about listening to all these wonderful people and how they witnessed and what's going on in the world, I always thought to myself, you know, what can I say? How do you add to that? Is there any way to add to, is there any way to put in another piece to fit the program? And I think what I was going to say, I had a lot of tumbling in my mind. And so what I came up with is that I'd just like to say briefly a little bit about a fellow named Ben Salmon, who was only one of 4 Catholics that were COs during World War I, and suffered greatly, force-fed with a tube down his throat 3 times a day for almost, like, I think it was 4 months, and almost killed him. And he had a couple of things I just want to share with you to try to say, what do we do about this whole situation? What is the core of it? What it really changes? What is the thing we have to move? And I think, I don't know, some of you may have read the book, the new book out, talking about America's original sin. And if you read that book, a wonderful book, and he's talking about racism and how it's still here. And so I was trying to think about, well, what's here now that's always here and causing us all this problem? And the idea is violence. Violence is the original sin of humanity. You know, never mind the apple. You know, violence is what does the damage, and does the damage throughout politically, socially, emotionally. Well, Ben Salmon dealt with that same idea, and he said in one of his articles, he wrote a tremendous book, and this also is on you can look it up on the web, bensalmon.org, and he wrote on there, what is the big, he said, is militarism. It's 100 years ago, and he was saying militarism is the greatest evil that the Roman Catholic Church belongs to and causes our problems. And what does militarism do? Why does it do so much harm? Because I always think, and I like to fix things, and so when you're trying to fix things, you have to have a toolbox. And what's in the toolbox depends on what you can do. And our country, sad to say, with many supports of many churches, is that our toolbox is militarism. It's plastered right on there in all counts. And what it carries is killing and destruction. And that's what happens and been happening now. It's going to full blast because all these countries that we created, such terror and such killing and such destruction. No more Marshall change. You know, the Marshall Plan was wonderful. None of that anymore. The only thing in the toolbox that we can use, destruction and killing. And so that's what we're up against. And Ben Salmon says the problem, what he was saying, and I say it because of my religious beliefs, and Martin Luther King says, the only way we're going to come out from this violence is to have training and teaching and suffering and acceptance on a religious level in order to bring back peace on this earth. And so that's sort of the way to do it. And so I remember in my short term in the military being drafted, I remember the thing that changed my mind that really made, and I was from Binghamton here, I'm from Binghamton, worked at IBM, was an apprenticeship, was on my way, you know, to make a lot of good money, and got drafted. And when I got drafted, the thing that came to me and really forced me was bayonet practice. And then those of you that are veterans know that, you know, you put the knife on the end of the rifle, and you know, and what you got to do is start screaming, kill, kill, kill. And that blasted my mind because first of all, I says, I don't know anybody I want to kill. And secondly, I think most people are good. And I don't fit into this regime that they're teaching me to kill and take apart weapons. So I said, well, as being a good Christian, I'm going to go to my priest and find out, you know, what I can do. So I knocked on the door, and here comes a young priest at the door, captain. And I says, you know, I'm not right for this place. I says, you know, I don't want to kill, and I don't want to do these things. He says, oh, you're drafted, right? I says, yeah, I'm drafted. He says, don't worry about it. 2 years, you'll be out of there. Don't worry about it. That was the answer. And that's the answer we get today is either silence or misinformation. So I came back, I decided, well, I want to change I quit IBM, went to the seminary, and during the seminary teaching, I should have learned more, I never heard a word. We never heard a word about nonviolence. We never heard a word about conscientious objector. So the thing is, but we do have the answer. We have to rid ourselves of this
part of this group, and they're exactly like the same people that are walking down the street right now. We found out on Memorial Day that a lot of those people that we were threatened with from that motorcycle gang didn't know anything about it. That's exactly how the system works. People are told, they believe this ideology, and they follow it through. We need to be talking with them more. Here in Binghamton, we have, in Broome County, we have one of the largest parts of the industrial complex, military industrial complex is Lockheed Martin. We need to revive those movements of conversion, of just transition. The other one that's very important, these are things that we can actually do right now. Talking with people, reasoning with them, showing films. We're showing a movie, a number of people involved in it, called A Bold Peace, about a military 60 years with no military and the difference. They're number one in the happiness index in the world. But the other thing that we can do is the New York State Teachers Retirement Fund, 22nd largest in the world, is heavily invested in military industrial complex. These are things that we can do. There's a healthcare, New York healthcare act. Go out of card. Do these different things so we can work together. It's $5.7 trillion for the budget for Brown University. It didn't include the millions of people that were killed. It didn't include the post-traumatic stress disorder. It didn't include any of the 215% increase in veterans suicides and rehabilitation programs. So this is an issue this is something that was run by both sides, Democrats and Republicans. And I look around and I see like so few young people here. My daughter being one of them, she can't afford to go to college. A lot of them are working. We're living in this area alone. These are the symbols of like what $5.7 trillion does to the economy and what it does to our lives. So the parade has started. Let's try to talk with as many people as we can. Let's get them to sign health care cards. Let's tell them about the movie. Let's not look at them as an enemy, but just people that haven't been converted yet, or they haven't come to our conclusions.
Hey, good to see you.
Good, how are you?
Good. Hi.
Good to see
Thank
you.
you very much for your
Thank you.
service.
Thank you.
I know.
Rick, you did tell them about the movie that it is.
It's getting tired of getting banned.
Thank you, Donna.
Well, you know what? You can make
Thank
this
you.
more than one
Thank you.
right? Yeah. And we're
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
How you doing? You are Joe.
Our service really is a service to the people, not to the militarized.
Thank you. God bless you.
Anyway, we're about ready to wrap it up. I think, John Patterson, don't you have some handbills that some people can? Yeah, I think they probably those individuals who are passing them out, John, can probably start any time because the people are lined up down the road here a ways. And the other thing is it's going to take a bit before the parade goes live. But for those of you who were not here earlier, when the last police car goes by, we will join the parade. Right? We will join the parade. If there is any particular issue with anyone, feel free to go on the sidewalk. Okay? The senator is here. Maybe he'd like to join us at the end of the parade. He had a chance last May and was not able to do it. So, any questions about what we're supposed to be doing with the parade was on? Any questions?
Thank you to my family.
Thank you, Senator. You're welcome.
Good, how are you?
Good.
Much more warmer than me.
How you doing? Good. How come you out? Freezing. Oh, like the bed. Good to see you, though. Coming back to
How does that a veteran's
I'm sorry.
I'm in your way and all, let me know.
Oh, that's okay.
Keep popping in and out. I'm
Oh,
mostly
that's
just trying
okay.
to stay in the sun.
I know, that's a good idea. I'm starting to get cold.
Yeah. It doesn't really plan it. At least we have some. Work usually in my job too, especially in the. And usually I have all my business cards, and I usually give them out.
It's the whole world too. It's not just Americans.
Don't let the hemorrhoids take over.
Right. Yeah, get out of the car. That'll help.
The end of the parade now. That's what I said.
For all the other folks that are the majority.
And so that's why I said to him, what about our property rights when you pollute our water and then mess up our air? What are we supposed to do then?
join us. Go Trump. Oh, jeez, now we know you're a See ya. Go USA. Forget Trump. He goes, baby.
You know what, Abe? I gotta get started.
Veterans in need, see the DAB, see Jeff, and help out our veterans. The dog is Banner, faithful to his veteran. I have